Hello, everybody. This is Jay with Behind the Grind, the Professional GM Chronicles. Thank you for joining us today, and we are blessed to be able to have Daniel, the Wordsmith, joining us as a professional GM on Start Playing Games and other formats as well. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you.
Hey, he just takes some time to be able to visit as a pro GM to give us insights on some things that he does that might help us to be able to up our games as game masters. So, if you like this material, I can't emphasize this enough, folks. Swear your oath to the cause, like, share, and subscribe to this epic saga. So, Daniel, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. I mean, I'm really big into the hobby. I like role-playing games, video games, books, everything in that realm of influence for sure. And I have to say, like, what really drew me to my story is a little unusual, perhaps, because I was one summer up in the woods at a cabin, and I was 8 years old. So this was like 1988, and my dad was setting up a game of Dungeons and Dragons at this like old oak table, kerosene lantern, old graph paper maps out, people rolling dice, and my eyes were huge. Like, what is this? This is really cool. And all my older brothers and cousins are playing, and I'm like, I want to play this. Can I play this? And everyone's like, no, no, you're too young. You're too young. You're 8. And my dad's like, no, he's my son. He can play. He can play. And I was hooked from there, like playing by lantern light in the woods at night, playing D&D from a very young age. And that's from there. I mean, I don't think I can think of a time in
That's
my
an
life when I
awesome
wasn't playing.
ambiance, man. That's so
Yes,
fantastic.
I would, I've heard about D&D, in a castle, but I'm telling you, D&D in a cabin in the woods, I highly recommend it.
Nice.
And then I've been playing ever since in one form or another throughout my life. It's been just something constant in my life, and so I've really enjoyed it. So I like sharing this with people too, new people into the hobby, veterans, you name it. It's been great.
That's awesome. Um, do you remember the first time? Okay, so you talked to us a
Oh,
little bit how you got into this.
uh,
How did you become a game master?
all right. So when the summer was done, we played a lot that summer, and then when the summer was done, and we're heading back. I was going with my cousin that was closest to me in age, and we're in the back of this pickup truck. Uh, no seatbelts back then, apparently.
Back then,
And,
it was acceptable.
all I had was some dice in my pocket, and we're driving back, and he's like, "Well, I guess we're done with that then." And I'm like, "No, no, we can't be." And I'm like, "We have to play some more, you know." And so we end up making some plans to start playing. I didn't have any books. I just had paper and dice, and we started meetings. We started playing, and I assumed the role of the DM. It's like my dad's the DM, so I mean, it just makes sense, I guess, that I would be. And we started playing. It was terrible. I mean, looking back, very, very terrible. But that's how I got started. And then from there, I started like trying to find all the sources I could. I got to get more of these books. I got to get more into this, and it started growing and growing from there. And I've been sort of the forever DM ever since. And strange, like even as a younger kid, DMing for my older brothers
Hmm.
and cousins was an interesting dynamic, right? You got the ones that would normally be, uh, pushing you around a little bit, but
Yeah.
but then I sit down in the DM seat and they're like, okay, hey, I didn't really mean that earlier, so so take it easy, all right? It was an interesting dynamic, and yeah, exactly. But they kept coming back to the table, so I was doing something right, and I got better and better as time went on. But it's been great, and I've been sharing it with family, with friends from then on.
Well, okay, so you've been doing this for a while, and Start Playing Games, you've got how many games are in your belt right now? I know it's well over 750.
Yeah, like 777, but who's keeping count?
I was going to say, they do. But that really says something about the longevity and people, coming back and playing. So if you don't mind me asking, what has been your most memorable campaign, and what made it stand out to you?
So at any time or just during SPG?
Anytime.
Okay, so at any time, I ran this. I'm a big fan of Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan.
Yep, yep,
Uh,
yep.
Great series. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Um, and I had a lot of friends who were into it too. We were playing a lot of role playing games, and one of my friends said, "It would be cool is if we could do like role playing game in Wheel of Time." And I'm like, I could do that. And so I designed an engine for it and got all of our friends together. One friend drove a ridiculous amount of distance too, like down like a couple hours to come play. I'm like, how are you doing that? But we started playing Wheel of Time with our own characters and everything, you know, like a new turning of the wheel. And there were so many memorable moments from that campaign. We've been quoting it for years. I mean, like, we've all moved on with our lives and they're different parts of the states, but we'll still be like swapping stories about some of those times. Just really, really fantastic. Everything from an archer's duel between one of the characters and one of the big bad evil guys in a graveyard where he just remembers this moment. He'll have flashbacks later in life about this moment and whatnot. So that was a lot of fun. It was doing my own, you know, custom engine. It was a lot of some of my closest friends. It was my favorite book series. A lot of lore to draw on, and it just really enhanced everything. Yeah, very memorable for me and the players.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so do you have anything that really stands out since you became a professional GM?
Sure. So I ran an Out of the Abyss campaign,
Okay.
and which I really like. I love the Underdark, but and it was great. It's one of the best modules written. But I felt personally like they really didn't touch on all the demon lords very much. It was a very light touch. A lot of Demogorgon, a little bit of Jubilex and Zubtamoy. But it was a light touch, and probably because there's already a big campaign, and I'm like, we gotta fold more of these in here. People gotta see some of this stuff. They showed some excellent things in like the preview. I'm like, man, that's some good material there. Let's use that. And when you start folding in 8 different demon lords, all scheming not only against the world but themselves, a lot of interesting things start popping up. And I like it because it's also a little bit of a sandbox. But it's a little different. It's like a connection of smaller sandboxes that are all connected by this web. And I folded that in there with having, you know, Lolth kind of pulling the strings in the background, and it was like a web of deceit going on. And especially Fraz Urblu and Gratz really started, for the schemers, sort of like popping out a little bit, and a lot of memorable moments happened as a result. And some of them have actually done some deep dig into the lore of these demon lords because of what has happened. They're like, oh man, I hate these guys so much.
How does a game master approach, you know, something like a demon lord, some of these you know, god level type things, and do them justice?
Yeah,
especially since we're of, you know, limited faculties and stuff like that. I mean, I
Sure.
just like I applaud you for tackling that. I'd be
Sure.
a little scared, intimidated.
Well, you know, a lot of it is suggestion though. Like you don't have to be as explicit. You can suggest it and let them fill in the blanks, right?
Okay.
So a lot of it's that, just letting them make their own decisions about it. But the demon lords are, for me, a little bit easier because chaotic evil's ruled by their passions, right? So you take whatever their passions are and you just crank it up to 11. Whatever it is, just to a ridiculous level. It's probably still not high enough. And that really makes it memorable for players because that theme keeps coming back over and over again. And it also it adds into the inhuman nature because like a normal human being wouldn't be this over the top in this regard, right? So, but a lot of it's still suggestion and innuendo. Let them fill in the blanks. Don't answer every question. You don't need to. And that seems to work.
That's actually very good advice right there. That's great. Having 700 plus games under your belt, have you ever had a pro session, go off the rails? And if so, how'd you handle it?
So by off the rails, do you mean like off the plot train, or do you mean like
yeah? Let's go plot train. I mean,
Okay, yes.
Parties are notorious for taking your plans that you made up and stuff like that, and you know, going somewhere else and stuff like out of left field. So sorry.
So I have to say I don't like when I was younger, and I was always trying to make sure everything was meticulously right, everything was done right, and I tried to control everything because I thought if I didn't, it would be a mess. It wouldn't go well. But I started to learn that wasn't necessarily true. That was a fallacy in my head, and I sort of equate it to like learning to drive a car. You try and drive that car the first time, you got your hands tied on that wheel, you're trying to control every little thing, and it doesn't work. And that's counterintuitive, but if you learn to just relax a little bit lighter touch, and let things roll out the way it's going to roll out. You still have to guide the car so it doesn't go, crashing off the side of the road, but you don't have to try and control every little detail. And so as I have DM'd over the years, I've started like letting go more of the control and just kind of like put it more into the player's realm. And I have to say, there's also a little bit that's a little bit selfish here. I would do all this work, and they would just wreck and ruin it.
Yes.
And I'm going to have to do all this work again. And I started getting frustrated with that cycle. So what I started doing is started planning things out more broad, more archetypal, more general, and less specific. And then, as they roll through it, start folding in the details as they go. And that's worked a lot better for me. It's a lot less frustrating. It actually ends up being less work, which is weird. But it was less work for me.
I could see that.
And, yeah. And then, but there was other added benefits. Players felt like they could go anywhere and do anything. Like, they didn't feel constrained. Even though there are constraints there, they're just a lot more subtle, obviously. But they didn't feel constrained. They felt like they could go and do this or that. And what's weird, here's the really weird thing. When I started doing that, they started going after the plot trains more. And, like, I opened it up, and they're like, no, we're good. We actually like this. We're going to do... I'm like, wait a sec. Okay, whatever works. Let's roll with this. So I don't know why that is. There's something in the human psyche there. But once they perceive that they have the freedom, then they don't... It doesn't bother them. Then they just keep... They do what they were going to do anyways. So,
very
interesting.
Cool. Okay. If you don't mind, who or what inspired your approach to game mastering when you first started? Is there names that you want to put out there, or anything of the sort?
So I started really young. That'd be in '88. So we didn't have the same level of exposure to media that we do now. Oh man, that makes me sound old.
Dude, I'm 10 years older than you. Believe me, I know.
And so I met my dad, of course, because I saw him, so I wanted to aspire to be that. That was so cool playing in my first game like that. So I definitely like that. He liked a lot of the graph paper, a lot of maps, evocative language, the setting being at a table. I've always preferred at a table as a result of that. And then the older the table, the better, right?
Right.
And so that's what I aspired to. I didn't know of anyone else. And after that, I kind of went into isolation and was by myself for a long time, just doing my own thing, before I started like encountering other groups that were playing. And then that's how you guys play. That's interesting. But I'd already established myself by that point. So just my dad at that point would be the biggest influence. Though then I would start sharing information with other DMs, of course, as iron sharpens iron, right? We'd improve our trade. I remember once we had a small little town, a local fire station, and we had a volunteer fire department, and they were all into D&D. And so like on Sundays, they would have like, and they used the fire hall for it. And they'd get all these tables, and they'd get like a big group of people together, really big. Like sometimes you got just 6 people, that's not that much, but sometimes you got like 15, 16, approaching 20 people.
Oh, good Lord.
They started getting like assistant DMs, and it was a mess, but it was a glorious mess. And a lot of them were older, and I came in as a young buck, and I had to start learning, some new ways to play. And I knew a lot. I'd read the rules, religiously up to that point, and I had to learn to keep my mouth shut. Like, we're fighting a monster, like, oh no, that monster has this stat, this ability, and then the DM's like, oh yeah, and everyone's like, shut up, what are you doing? You're gonna get us killed. I'd like, okay, I gotta tone it down a little bit with that and whatnot. But I learned a lot by playing with. I usually play with older people as a kid. I'm not sure why, maybe just the time frame. But eventually what was strange is I end up DMing for this older group of people. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting dynamic as well. And I just did like a lot of my own custom stuff, and they're like, we've never seen this sort of stuff before. What is going on? But they like, yeah, let's keep doing this. Let's have this guy DM. And but I learned a lot also from the DMs that were there. They showed me a lot. And that's when I got more into like using figurines and stuff. I've been theater of the mind more up to that point. But then they'd come in, they're older guys with more disposable income. They'd come in with like these boxes and boxes opened them up, and it was like a little miniature convention, all these figurines. And I'm like, oh, this is nice. And they're like, hey, you
We're
want to
going to
borrow
measure the
figurines for the
distance to here to
campaign?
here, and this is
Yeah. Yeah, they were more war gamers than I was, but I learned a lot from it, so I really appreciated it.
very cool. All right, we're going to shift our line of question a little bit and focus more on the philosophy of game mastering, if you don't mind. How do you approach how do you balance narrative storytelling versus player agency?
I think we touched on this a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, in that I take a more hands-off approach, and I let the story develop a little bit more naturally. One thing I do is I try not to have the ending in mind, but I do try to have endings in mind. And what I mean by that, like for the Out of the Abyss campaign, they had one sort of as written ending that I really didn't think player characters would ever go for. So I developed some other possibilities, and
Okay.
I think at the end I had like 7 possibilities, and the campaign one was in there, and then I would keep track of what they're doing the whole campaign, see which ending it's leading towards. And by having it like that, there's a couple different benefits. One, replayability, which is important as a professional game master. I'm probably going to be running this campaign multiple times for the people that want to play it, and that way it's a little bit different each time. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is they feel like they have more freedom, and they can sense that it comes through many little different details. They don't feel like they're pegged into any one outcome. So that gives the agency element to it. Um, and then with the narrative storytelling, all of it is still building up to one of these outcomes based on decisions that they've made throughout the campaign. So it has the narrative storytelling, but it's got some fluctuation. It might roll out one way or the other, and it's really where they decide to start interacting with more.
Okay.
Are they deciding to interact more with this faction? Have they really taking a dislike to this demon lord, and as a result, were they clashing with them more? Right? All that sort of stuff lets it fluctuate. So you have the structure, you have the narrative storytelling, but you have a lot of leeway within that. And I found that's the best to balance those two, because I've done like wide open, complete sandbox,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes the most common response I get from people actually is, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel lost. They sort of like feel like they're floundering about, and they thought that they wanted the ultimate freedom. And I thought that too. And then they found it was like an overwhelming, they felt like they didn't know what to do, and they were stumbling across dangers they weren't prepared for and all these other things. But then they didn't want to be told what to do A, B, C. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be a happy middle ground here where we can have that structure, we can have that satisfying story, but they still have the choice and the freedom to do that. So that's my approach, trying not to lock in any one thing and see how the story develops, let it respond and evolve
Okay.
to what
Can
they
I
want.
ask you a scenario and get your input on it?
Sure.
Okay, so
Sure.
let's say like you have a character that is starting out as a fighter and they want to evolve into a paladin type character,
Ooh.
but in an open sandbox
Uh,
that kind of relies on the game master to be able to give some motivation or reasons or whatnot. But if you're doing
mhm,
a totally open game box, your
mhm.
guy's got to try and find his own way to do that. So how do
Uh-huh.
you balance that? I mean, to me, I've run into that situation you're talking about where we've got
Sure.
complete freedom, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I know what I want to do, but I'm not getting any cooperation on how to do this. I mean, so what's your
Yes.
thoughts on that?
So that's why I've actually sort of like, I don't do full open sandbox. I don't do full plot train. I do somewhere in the middle, depending on whatever setting that we're
Mm-hmm.
doing. Some need more of one or the other, whatever the theme is. But there's a lot in our DM toolbox that we can use. For example, you could have them in their travels come across a shrine in that case, right? And they might not choose to interact with that. That's fine. It was still an opportunity for it. You could also do things like dreams and visions. That right there is very like open ended, artistic. You can go a lot of places with it, and everyone can have a strange dream, right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be a priest to have a strange dream or have a special spell that says dream right on the title of it or anything like that. You can have a dream, and that's real evocative. And you do something like that, especially to a character you don't expect it for, right? Like fighter. They're the fighter. They fight, right? But the fighter has a dream, and you'll see the player, if you're at the table anyways, you'll see the player like sit at the edge of their seat, lean in. Tell me more about this. This dream that I had, and they'll frown a little bit. That's not a bad sign. They're just like frowning in thought and starting to think about it, and they're like, "What does this mean?" And you can leave it vague, leave it general, but like generally pointing in that maybe divine calling angle, right?
Interesting.
And and it doesn't have to be done all at once. Actually, it's better if it's not done all at once,
Okay.
right? Let it in stages come out. If it happens too soon, it feels forced. It feels contrived. But let it come out in stages. But have each stage be a little more though. Build on it. Add just a little more, a little more. It depend on the length of the campaign you're going for, but I'd suggest at least 3 stages, maybe 4 or 5 if it's particularly long. Depends how close you want to get to business. But start with something like that that's real general, and the next one should be a little more specific. And the next one should be a little bit more specific until you arrive at what the goal is, what you're trying to strive for. And then it will feel natural. And then it won't just be the player character playing that fighter. The other players will be along with the journey. And then when they go and they whether they're adding on multi-class paladin or some other arrangement, it's going to make sense to them in the narrative.
Right.
Right. It's not like a sudden change. All of a sudden, you didn't jump the shark here. But it's going to make sense in the narrative. And it should be at the end of it. Everyone should at the table be nodding, going, "Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can totally see it was paladin."
You do realize
Right?
anybody not Generation X is not going to get the jump the shark tank.
Oh,
the shark thing, right? I'm just saying. All right, let me ask you a question.
I gotta update my lingo.
Yeah, you and me both. Especially when dealing with kids, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, what's your approach to dealing with challenges or disruptive players at your table? With 750 plus games, I know you've had some kind of instances.
You know, it has happened, but it's by far a minority, right?
Okay.
It's not common. Like I thought it would be more common. In my fears before starting, I'm like, oh man, what am I gonna do? And it has happened though, but it's a rarity. So when it does happen though, I have found the best approach is I usually do it in 3 stages, just like the other thing, but always handle it privately first. It's very important. Unless it's so like outrageously egregious, that it has to be handled right then. But most things can be handled more privately. And approach and just carefully explain. And if here's the best way. You don't want to just come out like with an accusation that's going to put them on the defensive. What you want to do is, hey, I know you probably didn't mean this. That kind of gets the guard down. But what you did tonight may be perceived like this. And then you state the issue. And the most common response was like, "Oh my gosh, no, that's not what I meant. Man, let's fix that." Great, that's nice. But so start with that private. Let them talk to them like that. Let them know. Avoid any sort of accusations, of course. Just try and keep it very civil, very professional. And that might just be all it is. One and done. The problem doesn't pop up again. However, if it does pop up again, you have to address it a little more. Start with the least. And then each time build up, just like with game mastering, right? And you got to be a little bit more, maybe giving a little bit more firm pushback at the table, but not. I mean, you don't want to be calling them out or singling them out, but you can definitely push back on something that's causing a problem. And then the next stage, and you'll have to say at the second stage too, like if this keeps happening, I'm gonna have to remove you from the table. Because it's affecting everyone else's experience too. We got 6 people at this table. If you're doing this and it's negatively impacting the 5 other people at the table, that's not fair. It's not appropriate. And I've talked to you about it, so it's got to stop. And then at like the 3rd time, I don't know if it's not an official 3 strikes in my mind, but that's where it usually lands. Then I'll have to remove them. I would encourage you, any of your communications, just keep very careful eye on, keep very good records. You're doing this for a job, right? So you got to be professional. Part of being professional is keeping good records. And if there's any issue with SPG, you can provide those records. I'm like, okay, here's what I did here's the issue. Here's what I did to address the issue. I was getting player complaints about them. I spoke to them this time. And they persisted. So I had to remove them at that time. And then you're in the clear, right? You crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's. But I have to say that's really the minority. That's not most of the people in the hobby. Great people. In fact, they almost like fall all over themselves not to get anybody else upset, right? Like, really take into account what other people are thinking. So, but every once in a while, you get someone,
That's awesome.
and
Okay. Do you think that a game master should prioritize the story, the rules, or the player enjoyment, especially being a professional GM, and why?
so I mean, in my mind, those things all like build off of each other.
Okay.
But I think that's like a cop out answer. So let me try to dig down a little deeper. But I do think that they all impact each other. They all should be working in harmony with each other. But if I had to choose, if I really drilled down, I would say ultimately what we are doing is playing a game. And the purpose of a game is enjoyment, is escapism, and we can't lose sight of that because that's what it is. And sometimes we do lose sight of that, and that can lead to some problems. So if you came down to it, I think I would have to say the enjoyment of the game. Because otherwise, why are we doing it?
That's right.
Right? However, I'm not sure how much enjoyment of a game that you can have if the rules were fluctuating all over the place and things weren't going well because people disagreed about the rules, argued about the rules, and all this. So the rules got to be there, but that's the boring stuff, right? That's just the engine under the hood driving the vehicle. So it's got to be there, but I'm okay if it's there and invisible. Actually, I really don't care what engine or game we're playing, as long as it's not causing problems. Then I'm fine with it. But so rules are the boring stuff, but it's important to get the job done.
Okay.
And then the story, man, that's the really good stuff because that can actually ascend the game to something more. There can be purpose, there can be meaning. That's the stuff that's going to last with people. That's what's going to be burning bright in their minds. So you might think, well, it sounds like you're saying it should be the story, but we're not going to get to that if it wasn't fun to begin with. So you got to start with it being fun and entertaining. You got to have the rules there to make sure it happens. And then if everything's going good, if you've done your job, if the player's been committed and it's gone along, you're going to end up getting to that story part. And that's the peaks. That's the top of the mountain where you're going to be looking far and really appreciating what happened. Like you'll feel that nostalgia at the end of the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's satisfying, but it's kind of sad too because now it's over. But you're going to remember it for a long time. So I really like the story parts because of that payoff, but you're not going to get there without it being fun to begin with. So I think the most important is the fun. Everything else builds from there.
All right. So this other question, your philosophy of game mastering, is how do you build a sense of immersion for your players? I mean, do you find that it's the story? Do you find that you can use things like detailed maps, tokens, figurines? How do you build a sense of immersion?
I mean, I do all of that. Mm-hmm. I focus on good NPCs. I focus on a cool world. I focus on, I have sound playing for my players. All those things. Those are all good. I highly recommend all those. But I'm going to say something boring instead. What I have found and what I hear back from players a lot is consistency.
Okay.
And that sounds really boring, but I'm telling you, it has a really big payoff. And consistency is when you're playing, everything makes sense. When you look back, you should go, oh yeah, it totally makes sense knowing what we know now, right? So that consistency, and that consistency can pop up in so many ways. Is your world consistent? Does it seem like everything naturally flows from one step to the next? Are the players acting in a consistent fashion? If an NPC doesn't act consistent, that should be a red flag. Instead of, oh, he just forgot that NPC or whatnot. So it being consistent, I think, develops immersion into the world because the world's more believable then. Okay. It's acting in a logical fashion. And then this gives some players a superpower. The superpower is, okay, I know my DM's consistent, and I'm seeing these details. So I should be able to logically follow to a conclusion that, so-and-so's the big bad evil guy, right? And I've had players tell me that. They're like, I knew that NPC was acting out of sorts because I knew they wouldn't act like that. So, doppelganger, come on. And they figured it out based on logical consistency. So I like to be really consistent. So I take a lot of notes. I think about game a lot and make sure that it all fits the right feel.
Mm-hmm.
And they like that because then it feels more real. And that's what we want in our escapism. We want it to feel real. I'm not talking gritty realism like it's got to be tough and people are dying. I mean, it's got to make sense to us, right? Does it logically sound? And it sounds boring, but I'm telling you, it will add depth to your DMing if the world, the characters are consistent.
Okay. Very cool. Okay, so this is probably going to be the most controversial question you're going to run into. Okay. What is your stance on fudging dice as a game master?
So, to each their own. I'll start with that.
No, that's not a cop out at all.
Well, for me, so this actually ties in with the consistent thing.
Okay.
I set all of my rolling to open. So every single roll that I make, unless there's a very specific reason where knowing the results will change player behavior, and even then I have it set so I can reveal the roll after the fact, after that knowledge is no longer potentially disruptive. So I have it all roll out in the open. And what that does is it develops a lot of trust with the players, because I can't fudge those rolls because I already rolled them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that also elevates the danger, because now they know, hey, the dice have spoken, so that's what we're going to do. And a lot of my players tell me that they appreciate that. Now, some players might not, that's fine. And some DMs may not like that, and that's fine. But it for me, it's a trust issue, and it's consistent, and it elevates the danger. And there's also a certain element of letting fate have a say.
Sure.
Right? Like, the DM has a say in how they set things up, right? The players have a say in how they choose to make and play their characters, but it brings fate to the table. A little bit of destiny, a little bit of random, and that's where a lot of the excitement is.
True. But when you talked about earlier, you'd said that player enjoyment is a big factor in regards to importance. And so you're running into a new guy that just stepped into the game, doesn't know the game, and he's got a brand new fighter and stuff like that he's all excited about, and in his first encounter he gets critted and killed. I mean,
well, first of all, I have to say a lot of my games, just by popular demand, are 5th Ed Dungeons and Dragons, and you have to really work at it to die in that setup. So in some ways, that bothers me a little bit.
Sure.
I like a lot of old school games, but it also frees me up to just throw a whole lot of stuff at them, and they're pretty resilient. They're probably gonna make it, and whatnot. And death should be on the table. Like, and I let that known in advanced session 0. We talk about death is an option. In my campaigns, most campaigns won't go the full story arc without at least one player character dying. And usually it's their choice, like the whole stay behind, sacrifice themselves for the others, or that sort of stuff, or some really bad decisions leading up to that point. But I've had some where they didn't have any, and I've had some that, for one reason or another, turned into a little bit more of a meat grinder. But it's everything in the middle. Death should be an option because that lets you know that success is not a guarantee. And that's something our medium has that others don't. Like, if you watch a movie, you pretty much know how it's going to go. You read a book, you pretty much know how it's going to go. And I like those mediums, don't get me wrong. But something special about tabletop role-playing games is you don't know the outcome. And you could die. Well, your character, hopefully, could die. And that, for me, elevates the excitement. Because, man, I don't know how this is going to go. We have to play and find out how it's going to go. And it could end badly. It could end great. And that adds something to it that isn't present in other mediums. So that's why... Now, I'll work through it with players, and I want them to have an epic death. I mean, nobody wants an ignoble death out of nowhere, of course. And these are supposed to be heroic characters. They should have a heroic death, right? But on the other hand, it's not that hard to roll up a new character either. And fold it on in there. I have to say, I usually, when I get a lot of campaigns going, I usually do a 3rd level start. instead of first level starts, just because of the swingy nature. And just I like to get to the story a little quicker, and it seems like the level 1s and 2 are a little bit of a preamble, just in the nature of that particular system. Not all
Fair.
role playing games are that way, and if I'm playing a game for beginners, we do a level 1 start, right? But I usually do a third level start and just jump right into the storyline a little bit quicker, and then the player character is a little more resilient and whatnot, so it goes from there. But
Very cool.
I don't. I make a like a contract with my players. I say I'm gonna roll my dice out in the open. We're gonna let the dice have a say in the story too, and we'll find a way to fold it in, whatever that looks like,
Okay.
and whatnot. So it's worked for me. I mean, of course, players can be sad when their player character dies, but then they're usually like, hmm. But that means I can make this other character. And then a
Right.
lot of my players have a stable of characters, right? They got 50 player characters set up on D&D Beyond, just waiting for a chance. And so they'll bring it in. They're like, "Oh yeah, okay, well, I'm going to bring in this character now," that sort of thing. So.
All right. We're going to switch gears again and go into crafting worlds and narrative, Wordsmith. But before we do that, players, audience members, please make sure you swear your oath to the cause. Like, share, and subscribe to our epic saga. Let's do this, folks. So, all right. So now we're going to go to crafting worlds and narratives. So, how do you approach world building in your campaigns? Do you build top down or bottom up?
So it actually depends. I play a wide variety of role-playing
Okay.
games. And what I try to do is I tailor my approach to whatever it is that we're playing. Some games really benefit from starting at that village, and then you start expanding out from there, right? Especially the more open world sandbox variety. And some really benefit from having an established lore, a big old world, and then you plop somewhere down in it and then begin going from there. It really depends. Like when I did that Wheel of Time, that was more of top down. But the world was already established. A lot of the work was already done for me, right? And the players were already familiar with the world, and that helped. So that one was more of a top down. But if I'm doing something that's a little more like build out, like Shadow Dark, for example, would be a good example of one that you would start like maybe in a village, and that's like the whole of your world, and then you start building out from there. Maybe there's a dungeon or a cave nearby, and you get a job for it, and you do that, right? And I've done one shots as well, where the one shot like leads itself to that sort as well, because you don't have time to sit down and talk about the lore of the world. And the one shot hopefully should be starting as close to the action as possible, and so you just hit the ground running and start going from there. So I just lean in to whatever theme I'm trying to evoke, and what that might depend on the world, that might depend on the game setting. Like I would run Dark Sun a lot differently than I would run Forgotten Realms, for example.
Fair. What is your process for creating memorable NPCs?
So, really, just picking 2 or 3 traits at most, and making sure that the players hear that. And you want to say it more than once. Players will miss a single comment. You want to mention it at least more than once, so that it kind of becomes a thing of that character. And it can be a simple thing. Like it's surprising the things that players will latch onto from a wizard with their pipe blowing smoke rings, right? That will be that if you mention that a time or two, that sort of gets caught in their mind, and then you can really have some fun with that. Like they're at a place and they smell a little bit of pipe smoke. Players are gonna be like, I know who that is. And they get all excited, right? They're excited. They haven't even seen the NPC yet, but they know they're coming. So just picking a few, it doesn't really take a lot. Like a lot of people think that they need like a lot of information on this NPC but it only takes a few things that you really drive home. And then from there, make sure the character is consistent, like I said before. And that really seems to make them memorable. I would want to say, I fell prey in my younger years to the DMPC trap, where you make this really cool DMPC, this is Gandalf right here, and start doing everything for everyone, and that might actually become a memorable NPC, but for all the wrong reasons. It's gonna really stick. It's really gonna stick in their mind in a negative way instead. So I really try and make sure I don't have an NPC coming along solving all the problems. Solving the problems is part of the fun part. Let them solve their own problems. Mm-hmm. So Yeah.
I've heard that many times. That's actually really good.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so when you're running professional games, I would imagine you have players that will pay to get in and then not come back or stick around for a little while and stuff like that. So when they bring their characters with you, how do you incorporate their backstories into the larger campaign narrative? How does that work for you?
So just like we were talking earlier about building out a world,
Yeah.
backstories, you want to do it like that. You want to start small scale and then build out. And it's for that reason that you're talking about. Start small scale because you don't know if they're going to stick around or not. For one reason or another, life happens. And if you try to fold in that 9-page backstory into the campaign and they're there for a session and gone, you have wasted a phenomenal amount of time. And that's not good. So start small scale and then build out from there. And what I ask, just like for my NPCs there, I just want to know a few key things about the character when you come in. I want to know one ally that you have in the world. What's an NPC that you can trust that you would like that could maybe help you out? One rival, doesn't have to be your arch nemesis. Could be just a competitor, whatever you feel fits the character, and then something unusual, a secret, something special. Doesn't matter what it is, but something unusual. Those three things. I don't need a 9-page backstory. I'll start with those three, and we'll build up to that 9-page backstory as we go. And then the longer they're there, they're showing more of the commitment. Then they get more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense. A little customer loyalty thing going on there, and but it's also more natural. And coming into it, the player doesn't necessarily know exactly this character until they played it a little more, right? I've played the few rare times I've had the chance to play. Uh, I jump in, I don't really know the character, but as I play them, I start to figure them out a little more. And I don't want to be necessarily laden with a prior idea that I had that wasn't working out that well or didn't mesh with the campaign or setting that well. So just give me those three things. They're pretty universal. And then I find ways to hammer it into the campaign and more the more that they show up. And I have to say, I used to do it very inefficiently, like it just grafting it on in a very cumbersome way. I found some tricks on how to make it a little bit easier. And what I do is those allies and rivals, I look through the campaign that we're playing and I try to find an existing NPC that could fill that role. And that's really good for two reasons. One, it's really easy.
Mm-hmm.
Two, it naturally grafts them into the campaign because now that connection is more meaningful for that one character. And it's more likely that that NPC will be then sort of highlighted, right? Like maybe they're allies of a merchant in this one town. They have some useful information for the party, but the the fact that they're an ally of one of the PCs when they get to that town, they're like, "Hey, I know somebody here. I'm going to go over here," and then suddenly the suggestion to be involved with that plot hook came from the player, not the DM. And other players are much more likely to jump on board when another player is directing them. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Okay, so what advice do you have for GMs who struggle with improvisation during their sessions?
Ooh, I'm not going to be very helpful here because I did it from a young age, so I've had a lot of chance to practice with it, and I have a hard time not imagining it. So I feel like I'm not going to be that helpful, other than to say with time and practice it will get better. But you don't want to hear that, right? I remember hearing that in college when I was really tackling some tough math, right? And they're like, "Don't worry, it's going to come." I'm like, "Well, that's not helpful. I want to know right now." And I'm sure DMs would be like that too. They want to know right now. So I really, in this regard, I feel like I'm pretty weak here at
Okay.
helping other people. Other than what I said earlier about like letting letting go a little bit, having not trying to control everything, that sort of leads into that, right? Because as soon as you start not trying to control everything, then the improvisation starts coming in. So maybe if you are very slowly releasing control, on the upside, your improvisational skills should also be increasing
Okay.
in inversely
That totally
proportionately.
makes sense. Absolutely. Really does.
So that's all I can say, and I wish I could say more. I mean, I know I spend like a lot of time in my head and thinking about various scenarios, think about various characters, or I see something in some sort of media, I'm like, ooh, that's good. I gotta use that in some fashion. I'm gonna store that in the back of my brain, and then we could be playing, and then something just activate, like it's time. I should use that, and then I'll use it, right? So, but how do you teach that necessarily, right? That's more of a yeah. That's I'd struggle in that regard trying to help anyone in that
That's
with that.
fair.
Just other it'll come with time.
All right, we're going to pivot then. The next set of questions are set for pro GM questions. These are questions that guys like me that are wannabes would ask a guy like you that's trying to break into the business and get some ideas of what to expect going forward. So, what does a day of a pro GM look like?
Well, I'm sure everyone's a little bit different, but for me, I usually do a lot of my campaigns in the evening. That's probably pretty typical. Um, but I have projects I'll be working on, various role playing projects, or maybe I'm studying up on a campaign that I'm going to be running next. So I'll work on my projects, and then I'll take a break, come back, and then I'll do my prep. I try to keep my prep close to the game I'm playing.
Okay.
I find that's useful because it sort of like preloads my brain. So I know what's going on is fresh, especially if it's been like most of my games are weekly, but I have a few bi-weekly or monthly games. And I need it to be fresh while we're jumping on into it so all the details are snapping and everything's going good. So I like to prep right before. Prep, depending on the game, is anywhere from a half hour to an hour. Though if I've got something, especially if I'm running a pre-made that I've run before, prep drops to very minimal because I've done a lot with it already. But new games to me, or if I'm running my own custom make, or if I'm playing in a setting or a system that I haven't used as much, prep time will be a little more.
Okay.
I try not to do more than an hour of prep in a given day because you can really go down that rabbit hole. You could always prep something more, right? And they could consume all your time. And you got to wean yourself off of that and try to do as minimal prep as possible, just for quality of life for yourself. And if you get it going, you don't need as much prep.
Sure.
And that actually over prepping could lead to that trying to control things too much and actually be counterproductive. So for me, half hour to an hour of prep tops. Sometimes I don't need to prep at all if it's something I've ran on the regular, and things of that nature. And then comes the time to play. I'm making sure to communicate with my players. I have this thing there where when game time's close, I say the time is nigh. I missed it once, and my players called me out on it. They're like,
Did they
"Is the
really?
time not nigh?"
That's awesome.
And I'm like, "Oh, I dropped the ball on that one. I'm sorry."
All right, let me get into the next
And
question
then we
then.
play. Yeah.
What does your business model look like? I mean, how many games a day do you run per week?
So for me, I do about 5
A
every
week or okay?
Yeah. Five. I don't usually do multiple ones in a day because I have my other projects I'm working on.
Mhm.
I do like professional DMing, but I have other things I'm trying to fold into it. Otherwise, I'd probably do double that. I'd probably do 10 if I was just focusing on the professional DMing. So about 5, and it's good having one in a given day. It helps me kind of stay focused. I have done 2 or 3 in a day, and that can get a little bit challenging. I start to find I do have some limits after all. Like I thought I had insatiable appetite for role playing games, but there's a limit. Just like a good meal or a good dessert, there are definitely limits, and I can find after like maybe the third 3-hour session, my mind's getting a little hazy, a little fuzzy on the details, and so I gotta set my limits. I'd only do that rarely, but so usually about 5. I like weekly campaigns myself,
Mhm.
but I've had some players that it's just not in the cards for me schedule wise. So I like bi-weekly. So I've done some bi-weeklies. I had a private group of friends reach out to me and they say we want to play monthly, and I'm like, I think I could work that out for you. They're new players. They just want to, but they want to get together as friends, and that sounded cool. I wanted to bring more people into the hobby, and I'd set that up. But that's the typical for me. About 5 a week. Could be more, could be less. I do some one shots. I focus more on campaigns, mostly because players focus more on campaigns. But I love to still sprinkle one shots in there for a variety of reasons. It brings in new players.
Okay.
It also acts like a job interview in some ways, right? They get to see how I play, and with less commitment. And I've had plenty of one shot players go, which days are you running campaigns on?
Yeah.
And then they'll jump in. So it brings in new blood.
Got it.
And one shots are kind of fun. They're a different beast altogether, and so it's nice to mix things up a little bit. So
What's your
I
proportions?
sprinkle in.
What's your proportions of one shots to a campaign? Would you speculate?
Ooh, 5 to 1 at least, but maybe even close to like 6 or 7 to 1
Okay.
of campaigns to one shots. One shots don't feel quite as much. Most players are looking for a campaign.
Okay.
But one shots are good for if somebody doesn't have the time commitment, or they want to give you a trial run, or they're new and they don't know if they're going to like it or not, right? And so if they're new, I actually suggest a one shot. Hey, if you're not sure, you don't know, let's try one shot and see how you like it. And they feel much more likely to take that jump than, you're new, you're not sure if you like it. Let's play 1 or 2 years together and see if you like it. And they're like, whoa, that's a little too much, right? So one shots definitely have their place, but it's not where I put a lot of my focus. But I think it's an important element. It's a little bit of spice put into the stew.
Fair. I like that. All right. So this is an interesting question. Seeing that you've been game mastering for close to 3 decades, do you enjoy game mastering now as much as you did when you're doing it for free for friends? Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on that?
So that was a big question for me going into this. I'm like, do I really want to do this? Is this going to ruin one of my passions? Because I've heard that, and other people tell, if you start doing that, you're not going to like it anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that may be true, but I'm not going to know unless I try it. So I'm gonna dip my toes in the water and try it out. And it might be different for other people, but for me, it hasn't had an impact. I still really enjoy what I'm doing. I play with even more people. I get to do it even more regularly. So I mean, it's definitely different. It is a different beast altogether, but it's not necessarily bad. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I have a lot of fun with my clients, and they feel like I keep it professional, of course, but they do feel like friends. Like I get a lot of my social interaction from these individuals, right? And we've told some stories. I mean, there's not many people that I've went on a journey to take down demon lords or evil gods with, right? These are people like I'd have at my back. So it hasn't had that impact that I was afraid it was going to have. So I'm glad of that. Some people have expressed different sentiments, though. Some people felt like that it really did, because they thought it made it about the money. And I try not to focus on the money element of it. Of course, do it and are making money on the side, and not going to get rich anytime soon doing it. But I really just focus on following the passion and trying to produce the best product possible.
Okay.
And then that what's weird is it like, instead of draining me, I've had a lot of jobs that would drain me because it felt purposeless, meaningless, and this I get passionate about. I could actually feel like I have more energy at the end of a campaign, right? Like I have a good day at work, There's still, of course, any job is going to have its downs, right? It's going to have its bad days, and there's been an occasional rough session here or there, but by and large, it's been fantastic, and it hasn't had that sense to me that like I don't like this anymore.
Got it. What are your paying players' expectations of your game? What do they respond to? What do they seem to like?
I mean, the whole thing,
Okay.
because it's a tapestry, right? You're folding in so many elements. Now, since I know these are playing characters, I want to produce for them something extraordinary. So I keep folding in anything that I can find that I think is going to make things better. But I always take it back to my clients too. I get a lot of feedback. I've done polls on my Discord server, for example.
Okay.
And I get feedback if we do any house rules. I always run it by all the players, get all their feedback, and before I implement it or whatnot. And so they're very involved in the process. But like each time, first of all, let me take a step back.
Okay.
When I first started, I just had the basics, and I just made sure I mastered the basics of being a professional DM. And then don't stop there. Keep finding something else to fold in. Keep finding something else to make things better. It might be, hey, I wonder if I could fold in some Sirenscape for this.
Okay.
Right? And how could I implement that effectively? And study it. Make sure that you're implementing it effectively. You don't want to implement something if it's not going to be effective, or if you're not going to do it wholeheartedly. and then find something else that you can fold. Are there some third-party publisher materials that could maybe benefit our campaigns? I'm going to study that, find that, research it, fold it in, and then keep adding thing after thing. Don't try to do everything at once. It's too much, and you're going to do everything badly.
That
Better
makes
to
sense,
do
yeah.
things good one at a time and build, and that says a lot to your players too. They're like, oh, this is good, but it's getting better and better, so I can anticipate things are going to get even better than it was, right? So that's what I've done. I folded in sound. I folded in additional materials. I do a lot of custom design and custom work for players. I do a lot of my own magic items, my own monsters. I get third party sources. That way, that maybe things aren't what they've expected. There's something a little bit fresh and new, kind of jumping out of the woodwork, and they're like, I have no idea what this monster is, and I'm a little bit terrified.
That's good.
Yeah,
You can try to memorize your monster manual, but it's not going to help you now.
yes.
All right.
Yeah, younger me would be aghast.
All
That's
right.
not in the monster manual.
Okay, we're going to pivot. We're going to talk about the role of the Pro GM in the online TTRPG community. Okay? What do you think is the biggest challenge facing game masters in the modern TTRPG community?
Ooh, man. There's a lot going on out there. I would say DM burnout, DM shortage. That's been a thing. I mean, Wizards of the Coast has even mentioned it. We got a lot of people who are stuck as the forever DMs that are burning out for one reason or another. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that may or may not be. But that definitely seems to be a big problem. How can we get more people being DMs? And I think like the professional DM kind of fulfills a niche there, because now you can have more DMs with a vested interest to be able to fill that so that players can find tables. Because I know there was a stretch of time there where people were having some difficulty getting to a table, right? So I think that's one of the current challenges for sure. We had a big influx of folks around Stranger Things. We had a big influx of folks around the actual plays Critical Role. We had a big influx of folks around COVID, right? So we got a lot of new faces in the crowd, and a lot of them are new. So they're probably not ready to take on the mantle of DM yet, right? They need to play a little bit, perhaps. So that ratio of players to DMs, I think, is probably one of the bigger challenges at the moment.
Okay. What do you feel is the responsibility of the Pro GM for representing diversity and inclusion in your games, both at your table and in your game?
All right. So growing up, I was part of the nerd culture, the nerd herd. And I have to say, this group of people are some of the most inviting, open people to everyone that I've ever seen. And I think a lot of it's because we're the social outcasts, right? Back in the day, anyways. Maybe less now. I think it's a little bit more cool to be a nerd these days than it used to be. As a little bit of an understatement. But back in the day, if anyone showed interest in what we were doing, we would be so excited that anyone is showing an interest, that we would be like the next question out of our mouths, do you want to play? You know, so we'd be inviting everyone to the table. And I've played with so many different people from all over, from all walks of life. And I like that, actually. I mean, I remember having a birthday once when I was a kid, and I have all these different friends from my different walks of life, and they stop and they look at each other and they're like, what are we all doing here together? Right? Like,
It's
we
a
would
breakfast
not be
club,
here
a role
if we
playing
didn't
game.
know this one guy, right? And so I think it crosses a lot of boundaries already, and that's exciting, right?
Nice.
So I love that. I like to play with everyone, and it's kind of hard to be more inclusive than everyone, in my opinion.
Okay. What advice would you give to GMs looking to make a name for themselves online?
I mean, I said a lot of it already, but I'll kind of hammer the point home.
Okay.
Start with your basics, and don't try to do everything at once. And then find the next thing that you're going to master, and then bring that in, and just let that percolate until you feel like you got that under control. But don't stop there. Find the next thing that you can find and master, whether that's adding sound, whether that's adding new monsters, whether that's learning how to research more. I'm more of a creative type, and I really struggle at first, for me, with marketing, right? I get a little embarrassed trying to like sell myself and reach out to people. I'm a little bit more of a like a homebody, an introvert, and so trying to learn how to market was really uncomfortable for me at first, and so I had to learn. Okay, what can I do to market myself? What are the mediums? So that was a really tough stretch for me. But learning how to reach out to people and get the word out there. SPG does some of that. That's part of what the service that they offer is, which is why I was attracted. Like, you guys get to handle that? Good. But it's still, you still want to try and be able to reach as many people as possible on social media, on Discord servers, on forums, and all of that. So find the next thing to improve yourself at, and then fold it in. Don't try and do everything at once. You'll do everything badly. Do one thing at a time well, and in given time, it's going to produce results.
All right. Daniel, that's all the questions I want to go through right now. I want to take a little bit of time, though, for you.
Okay.
Is there any projects that you want to promote? Any things that you got going on? You mentioned earlier stuff, and at the time that I post this, the interview, I'll make sure I include all the links and stuff like that you send me for people to be able to take a look at. But what kind of things would you like to promote?
Well, some things I can't talk about too much. I'll keep it vague. I am currently working on my own tabletop role-playing game system.
Okay.
And I'm in talks with a published author. And his project manager is meeting with me to run through a campaign so that they can kind of get a look for it. And they've been sort of fishing around for somebody to make a role-playing game for their book series.
Okay.
And it's not official yet, though. We're in some talks on it, so I'm not going to mention it too much more than that. But there's some big things coming down the pipeline, I guess you could say. And I'm really excited. I love taking a game and matching it to a theme, right? Like a book series, like I did with Wheel of Time, right? I'm doing something similar now, but maybe in a professional capacity. So I'm excited about that, but I don't have many details to share at this time.
That's fine.
I'm working on lots of other role-playing games. Those are just a lot of my projects that I'm going on, and then I'm just running my campaigns for folks right now. But stay tuned, I guess I would say, because there's some things that are coming.
Do want to talk about, we talked about off camera and bring into this is we talked about your in a prior life being an educator, and during that time you actually had a RPG club.
Yes.
This is phenomenal. I love this idea.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a little bit more of these. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So I'm not sure if I started this before it was cool, but so I was. Role-playing has been a passion in my life, right? And actually, role-playing games helped me a lot in education. When I was a kid, I started at 8. Like, I started reading all those books, writing all those words. I my classmates would write sword, SORD, and I'm like, no, you need that W in there, And so, it sort of hyper-powered my education. Like, I started getting into talented and gifted. I don't think because of any natural talent, but because of my exposure to a lot of things early on, right? Like, I had an intuitive grasp of probability from rolling all those dice, right? All the math involved in D&D, super powered my math, the reading, the writing, everything. So I thought that those games actually gave me a leg up in education.
So kind of thematic learning. I like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, they don't realize that they're learning. That's the best part. And so when I was an educator, I was a math teacher because it was in high demand, and I like probability. That's dice, right? So when I got started, I'm like, what helped me when I was a kid? Role-playing games helped me. I wonder if, and I know I talked to my administrator and everything. I'm like, hey, look, here's what I want to do, and here's why. And it helped me in my life, and I think it would help my students. And they were like, that sounds awesome. Let's do that. You're volunteering free time, go for it. So I set up a D&D club in my school, and a surprising number of students were showing up. I think this was around, it might have been when Stranger Things had first come out.
Okay.
So that might have been a factor, I'm not sure. But they started showing up, and I started setting it up, and I didn't want it to be all about me, so I actually basically started getting some of the students to be the DMs, and I was like a DM coach. And I say, hey, here's some materials, here's some dice. Who wants to do these roles? And then I'd get it going, and I'd have like 4 or 5 tables, and I would just sort of like walk amongst the tables. And then if the DM had question, they raise a hand, I come over and I'd answer it and like show them in the rule book. But usually just say, hey, you're the DM, just come up with something. And that was great. And those students were beginning to perform better academically. I started hearing back from other students like, what is so and so doing? They're really doing a lot better at their, whatever the subject was. I'm like, well, we're doing this club, and they're having a lot of fun. They're doing a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of math. You get them to come after school and do math, and so that was great. Now, sadly, when we were moving and I had to leave that school behind, the students, they ended up giving me this stapler. They all pitched in. So a dragon stapler. So the dragon, as it's chomping down, is doing a stapler on it. It's great. And on the bottom, they wrote like, "Mr. Shelton, you rolled a critical hit on our hearts." And oh man, that hit my heart, right? And just very memorable experience. I still have the stapler that they got me. Little dragon. It's not popping up very good.
There you go.
A little message on the bottom, and that really motivated me. I think this works. You're introducing a whole new generation to the game, right? They're gonna have a lot of memories of that, and some of these are the same social outcasts that I was, right? The nerd herd, and it gave them a place. It gave them a chance to interact. A lot of us are not the most socially adept individuals. And this gave them that experience, right? We had a lot of autistic kids in there too. That was getting them interaction with other people that was helpful. And then just a chance, the escapism and the enjoyment that we get out of it. And so I think that will help us pass the torch on this hobby to the next generation. And then someday maybe they're going to do the same, right? And yeah, so that's just a memorable thing for me, that sort of intersection between education in my prior life and the hobby and my current job. So,
Daniel, that's fantastic. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. I want to thank you again, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. I found this interview very insightful, entertaining, and even though you described yourself as an introvert, like my wife says to me and stuff like that, I disagree. But that's okay. But guys and gals, if you would, we love communications. When we put this thing out there, I'll make sure I include links to all the things that Daniel sends me that he's willing to share with us. And also, if you have questions for him, ask questions. Ask questions to me. We just want to find ways to be able to find out what you're looking for, what we can address, and just make this thing worthwhile. So again, swear your oath to the cause. Like, share, and subscribe to our epic saga. I won't say that again, but I have enjoyed actually saying that. It's been a lot of fun. Daniel, again, thank you so much for your time on this, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.